On this Sunday last year, I reviewed the history of Mother's Day in the United States from the work of Anne Reeves Jarvis and her Mother's Day work clubs before and during the Civil War, and Unitarian Julia Ward Howe's call for a Mother's Day for Peace, to the lobbying of Anna Jarvis, daughter of Anne, for a National Mother's Day holiday on the second Sunday of May. I contrasted that with Mother's Day in England, which when I was growing up, I knew as a church observance called Mothering Sunday. It falls on the fourth Sunday in Lent, so it's one of those movable feasts, and you have to do astronomy to figure out when it is. And as much as these two forms of Mother's Day might seem unrelated, the transformation of Mothering Sunday as a minor church holiday into a popular Mother's Day in England was actually inspired by the transatlantic news of the efforts of Anna Jarvis here in the US. Now, as an Anglican church holiday, Mothering Sunday was a day for people to visit their mother church, usually the church in which they had been baptized. It was a day for rejoicing too, a welcome break from the austerity of Lent and various traditions developed around it, including the baking of special sweets and the picking of flowers. These days, unfortunately, many of these traditions have been forgotten, and Mother's Day on either side of the Atlantic has been commercialized, something that Anna Jarvis disliked to the point that she was arrested for protesting it. In reflecting on this last year, I wondered what the idea of a mother church might mean to Unitarian Universalists, and what it might mean to celebrate it as our own holiday. I've met a number of UUs over the years who refer to the congregation where they first became a UU as their home church. But that would also apply to the congregation where someone had their child dedication or coming of age or bridging. I wondered what it would mean to have a particular Sunday when UUs are invited to visit the congregation where they first became a UU or had one of those rites of passage as a child or a youth. And given that the second Sunday in May is much easier for most people to track than the fourth Sunday in Lent, I propose that this homecoming could be on Mother's Day. Chances are, for someone who grew up in a particular congregation, that those people's mothers, their parents who do the work of mothering, still go to that home church, that mother church too. Oh, and May is also the month of the anniversary of the consolidation that formed the Unitarian Universalist Association, and it's the month of the anniversary of the UUFP. So it seems like a good month to celebrate this congregation, this faith, and those who have grown up in it too. So today we're starting this homecoming tradition, though since this is the first year we're doing this, we can't really call it a tradition yet. Maybe next year. In a few minutes, I'll invite those of you who are willing to speak to come forward and say something about what this congregation means to you, whether you grew up here or had a child or grandchild who did, or if you're an RE teacher or an RE supporter, which really ought to be all of us, of course. Those of you on Zoom will have an opportunity to do this too. Then I'll say something about why our ministry to children and youth and families matters, and why it's an important part of our vision of ourselves as a congregation, as a beloved community. First, though, I want to say something about the gift of being able to come home in this way, of even having such a home. I didn't grow up UU. There is no Unitarian Universalism in England. Unitarian churches are few and small, and as it turns out, a great uncle of mine by marriage was the last ever Universalist minister in England. I became a UU officially as an adult at the Unitarian Society of Hartford in Connecticut. So that's my home church. I've been back a number of times during the 16 years since Alison and I left Connecticut. My mother-in-law lives just a couple of miles away. And I always feel good walking into that building, so distinctively shaped like a circus tent made out of concrete. It was built in the 60s when architects were experimenting with concrete. I'm glad to see people I know, of course, and I'm happy when they recognize me too. But more than that, I find a sense of peace that this was my church home, where I sang in the choir and chaired the Social Justice Committee and helped lead adult programs and worked with the youth and even preached a few times. Sure, it wasn't all sunshine and roses, but I found the Unitarian Society of Hartford when I needed it in my life, and it supported me in my first tentative forays into ministry. It will always hold a special place in my heart. Now, I have another older home church, and though I don't know when or even if I'll visit, I find that it's tremendously comforting just to know that it's there. It's the Methodist church where I was christened in the town where I lived until I was a teenager. I don't remember being baptized, of course, I was a baby, but I do remember going to Sunday school there, my father taking my sister and me, and I remember the minister and some of her services and RE classes and social events, and how there were various back doors and hallways between the sanctuary and the main hall that made games of hide and seek so fun. Last year, I found myself looking that church up online when I discovered that the software we use to add lyrics to hymn videos comes from a company in that same town where I grew up, just a couple of blocks along the main road from the church. They have a nice website and a Facebook page, and I'm not only glad, but as I say, tremendously comforted to know that the church is not only still around, but is doing well in these challenging times. So much in our lives changes, particularly as we move from childhood to young adulthood, that we need a few reliable points of attachment somewhere in the world to give us at least some sense of stability in later life. I want the UUFP to be one such point of attachment for all of the children who grow up within these walls, for every family that celebrates a child dedication here, for every youth and young adult who goes through coming of age or bridging, for every adult who discovers here that they are a UU. This congregation will not be everyone's religious home forever, but it will always be their home church, and we will always be ready to welcome them home. A few years ago, we drafted a vision for the UUFP's future. Given our mission to grow in wonder, connect in love, engage in service, and inspire generosity, we asked ourselves what the UUFP might look like in 5 or 10 years' time once we were living into that mission more fully. Not surprisingly, a large part of our vision concerned our need for better facilities and more space. This had been on our minds for some years, and in fact was the reason we worked on articulating our mission in the first place. It's been something, as you heard in the report from Parker, that the Planning Committee, the Real Estate Task Force, and others have continued to work on all through the pandemic. However, that's not all that our vision includes. It also includes social justice and visibility to the public and staffing and spiritual development. And it names diversity and growth as being important too, particularly when it comes to being more child-friendly and more teenager-friendly. As reported by the Planning Committee following conversations with various people and groups, Our vision is for every child, youth, parent, and other caring adult to work together to build their understanding of this religion and spread it to the world. That was written before the pandemic, but it's only become more vital since then. The pandemic, of course, was hard on congregations generally, but it hit religious education particularly hard. And that's not just UUs, but across Christian denominations and other faiths too. I can speak from personal experience when it comes to how difficult it was for children to be isolated from their friends, for them to suffer through a week of doing school on Zoom, or worse, Microsoft Teams, and then for parents to try to convince them to do RE online too. To back up my anecdotal evidence, there's a new report from the Hartford Institute for Religion Research with the data that online religious education did not work well for children, even as it had benefits for adult RE. In fact, that report shows, although almost all congregations have now resumed in-person worship, RE is still far from what it was pre-pandemic. And then there's this one sentence from the report. I'm going to read it to you and see who comes to mind. Even in the midst of these challenges, religious education leaders showed considerable originality using online tools, strengthening at-home DIY efforts, hosting intergenerational activities with COVID precautions, and creating novel approaches like Pizza Church or Dungeons and Dragons Club. You thought of Joanne, yes?
Yes.
I know that you know how hard she's worked during the pandemic to provide creative ways for our children and youth to stay connected. In the financial feasibility study conducted last year to predict the success of our capital campaign, stewardship consultant Mark Hewitt affirmed that RE is an important part of the UUFP's vision, that it's a big part of the reason why we need more space, and that it matters to you, the congregation. Mark also reported that we need a plan for intentional growth in membership and diversity, rather than wishfully thinking that if we build it, they will come. And our vision for RE has got to be at the heart of that plan. So I'm pleased to report that this week, Joanne and I will be meeting with Southern Region staff to talk about how we might develop such a plan. A few of you are also part of that conversation about growth and our vision for RE, and it's open to anyone else who's interested too. I'm also pleased to report that as one of our goals for this year's canvas, there is in the draft budget for next year funding for Kids Day In. That's the Sunday afternoon program that provides activities and structured play for children while their parents do whatever they want during that time. Kids Day In was popular before the pandemic, and we believe it will help attract new families to the congregation now too. The last 2 years have been particularly hard on RE, and I know it's been hard for Joanne and our RE volunteers too. The good news is that we are now in a great place to rebuild our RE program, to live into our vision for ourselves by revitalizing this part of our church home, to plan for intentional growth in membership and diversity, and to recommit to becoming the congregation that our mission calls us to be. And with all of your help and support in this shared ministry that is religious exploration at the UUFP, I know that we will succeed. May it be so.